There we go. Okay. So I'm Bruce Calder, the VP of Consulting here at Claigan, and I'm talking about Canadian PFAS reporting. So the agenda, I'm going to do a tiny bit of introduction, mostly this actually, about the Section 71 notice. I'm going to summarize it in oversimplified detail. I will give you, there will be attached access to the whole thing. No good, there's already questions. By the way, there's already questions coming in. I can see them, fantastic. I really appreciate it. There's a Q&A panel, so feel free to add questions to it, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. So, summary, I'm gonna oversimplify. The original summary is like, here's really the main points. When you dig into the details of it, there's a little bit more. Let me start with the high level stuff. I'm gonna explain SEPA, Canadian Environmental Protection Act. It is not the most sensical thing you've ever seen. I think our motto for restricted materials legislation should be unnecessarily complicated. And this will bring that to the forefront. I'll talk about Section 71 notice, which is what we're talking about today, the PFAS reporting. There's 1 year. Last year was quite an exotic list of chemicals, which often came down to whether or not you use like vegetable oil or palm oil in your product. I'll talk about the Section 46 notice briefly, and that's like the plastics registry. So last couple of webinars, we've definitely done the Canadian Plastics Registry, same legislation, different notice, Section 46. And I'll talk about Canadian prohibition, the restriction side, which is going to be beefed up quite a bit this fall. And they're all interrelated in an unnecessarily complicated way. PFAS reporting, and then I'll actually show the majors, like, here's where you get more information. It's really cool about giving people the access to get more information, to go in it, and then make fine detailed comments that I have to look up. One of the challenges with this legislation and all these notices is the way they're written is like basically companies under Part 2D have to complete the reporting sections of this section, and you have to sit there and basically play a little game of almost like software to figure out where the different rabbit goes, what hole to go down to. So lots and lots of detail. So I want to give you guys that direct access so you can really look at yourself and double check things. There's a lot of fine detail, especially when sometimes it's going to be oversimplistic because the sheer range of audience here, and for your specific situation, further detail is likely needed. So I'll talk about the notice, the thing that's making all this happen. I'll talk about the guidance related to that notice, the reporting form, which is the Excel sheet you fill in and submit. So I'll show you where they all are, and the reporting portal. So you can look at things yourself. But that's kind of one of the big points here. I'm trying to summarize, and usually in this venue, in the time, and specifics, it's sometimes a little difficult to get every single detail down. So feel free to ask questions, but I preferably give you direct access so you can see it. Scope and key definitions. Some of the word definitions do not make a lot of sense, so I'm putting in some extra definitions there. And then I'll actually talk about the PFAS reporting details. I'm going to go into the Excel sheet you have to fill in and kind of explain it very high level, very fast. And this is where more details needed for the morning version. So anyone who attended the morning version or had a colleague attending the morning version, tell them the afternoon version is even better. It's got a little more detail. It separates, especially for physical products, manufactured items. The reporting details are a little bit different depending on what your product type is, actually. And that fine tuning has been upgraded here, so it's a little more understandable. And it's overlapped with other regulations. How does it overlap with the US TSCA, which it does somewhat. For the most part, it's simpler, except for when it isn't. How does it overlap with the Canadian Plastics Registry? Quite a bit, actually, and how that all works. And then I have a Q&A. So the idea is to be 50 minutes long. I went a little over, Tom. I think I went to 54 minutes in blathering on. And I think I went another 15 minutes in Q&A. There are tons of questions, and I didn't get to all of them this morning, which is kind of unfortunate. But again, if I don't get your questions, feel free to reach out. And some of the questions like, that's a good point. I'm going to have to look that up. So one of the reasons when you see the follow-up email, feel free to take a read. It'll have a little more detail in it, because often I get questions where the answer isn't necessarily on the tip of my tongue, especially when you're dealing with a brand new notice. This was, as you can see, from July 27th, a couple of weeks ago, and there's still a lot of digesting going on. Okay, so this is mandatory data gathering. It's a Section 71 notice of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. I'll explain on the next slide what that actually means. So importers and manufacturers and directly users of specific PFAS in chemicals and in physical products, articles, often called normally called manufactured products in this, are in scope. So whether you sell like chemical products like sunscreen or a physical product or a laptop, you're in scope. How you're in scope does differ a bit. You're required to report the chemical, often your volumes in 2023, but some of the articles, some of the products don't actually. And the product types using each PFAS. So those are the high level requirements. Some of the products will have to do application codes and function codes, application of the product and function of the PFAS. That is not true for everyone. So if you're making physical products, you're going to have at most all 5 of those, including some concentration information, but potentially lower. So we're going to go into that a bit more detail. In many cases, like products that aren't in, there's a specific list of product types that are in scope. Everybody else is also in scope, but they have less to do. And I'll explain that. And so the due date is January 29th, 2025. And definitely a lot of this is unnecessarily complicated, but I'll help explain. So this all comes from the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. It's the governing legislation in Canada for the risk of substances to the environment and human health. In reality, it's usually around the environment. In Canada, it's virtually impossible to get a substance ban that hurts humans. We know the substance that causes attention deficit. We know how people are exposed to it. We know how the brain cell death occurs in the first year of life. But it's perfectly allowed in the US and Canada because banning a substance that does that is virtually impossible in Canada. We know the main substance that causes Alzheimer's. We understand how the kidney function as it reduces over time eventually allows the poisoning event that creates Alzheimer's to outrun your ability to heal. We understand all that, but that's human health, and those chemicals are not restricted. However, if they bioaccumulate, like PFOA or SCCPs or quantum plus, those are the ones that get restricted. So this whole process is to get to that kind of restriction and risk management, but if it's human health related, it basically never gets there. The only ones that get there are bioaccumulants. But it's the way the process works. So if you're looking for a substance, you need to review for addition to Schedule 1. Schedule 1, which I'll explain, is the toxic substance list. Toxic substance list sounds like they have some kind of categorization. They do, they're on the list. And that's it. There's no restriction related to them. There's no labeling requirement. There's no GHS thing. It's if they get on Schedule 1, they are approved for more work to be done on them, more risk management measures. Doesn't mean they're ever going to get restricted, actually. It just means they're on the list. And you basically, Environment Canada, actually the real name is Environment and Climate Change Canada, or ECCC, and Health Canada. So one big difference also in SEPA compared to TSCA, TSCA and SEPA are very similar, but TSCA is EPA only. So if you're a medical device, for example, or a pharmaceutical, you're FDA regulated and you're not in TSCA. In Canada, Health Canada and Environmental and Climate Change Canada, which I'm also just going to call Environment Canada, old timer, they're both part of SEPA. That's why medical devices are in, as are pharmaceuticals. So this list of substances are one that now Environment Canada and Health Canada are approved to do work on, but it doesn't mean they're going to be restricted. And there's no restriction related to them for just being on the list. And to get there, often there's a data gather. So inside the legislation, there is a data gathering ability to learn more about substances as part of looking on the possibility of adding them to the toxic substance list. And these are the Section 71 notices. They're part of the Canadian Management Plan. And I'll show another section later. They're also part of the Canadian Management Plan. It's around sort of a loop in this area. So the January 2025 PFAS reporting is around Section 71 notices. And this is looking at substance and whether or not to further manage the risk of them. And one of the first things Canada likes to do to find out if they should manage the risk of the substance is to figure out if it's actually used and where. So one of the outcomes of this could be substances going on the Schedule 1, the toxic substance list. I mean, sometimes get questions, hey, do you have any substance in your product on the toxic substance list? Well, sure, everybody does, but there's no restriction to it, or labeling, or reporting, or warning, or anything. It just means that they're approved for further work. Kind of a weird thing. One of the most interesting ones, the most recent edition, I think the most recent edition, is plastic manufactured items on the toxic substance list. People are like, what? Yeah, like DHP is on here. Phthalate, cause attention deficit, but causing a brain cell death in the infant under 1 related to decision-making on low-used brain cells in the hippocampus. It's on here. It's not restricted, though. And plastic manufactured items are on here, which is related to the plastics registry in a minute. So substances, when they go in Schedule 1, can go into the chemical management plan. The chemical management plan does have work before and after Schedule 1. It's all around risk mitigation. One is to figure out to get them on the list. And the second part is once they're on the list, how to manage the risk of them. And how does Canada do manage the risk of them? They don't really do anything. They wait until the UN Stockholm Convention says they're bad, and then they implement the risk mitigation measures here. Otherwise, not really anything. So Section 46 notices are here. So these are ones that are on Schedule 1, like plastic manufactured items. Their data gathering process is normally Section 46. Like the Canadian Plastics Registry. So my last couple webinars have around the Section 46 notice on the Canadian Plastics Registry. And they can do these reoccurring registry, like you have to give them data every year, as opposed to the PFAS one we're talking about today, which is a one-time event. Section 71s are one-timers. Plastics Registry are reoccurring because they're Section 46. They can be reoccurring, but they don't have to. And plastic manufactured items, to be reoccurring, had to get on the toxic substance. And that's how the plastic registry exists. And that's a Section 46 notice. Now, some substances, mostly it gets restricted in the UN Stockholm Convention, and Canada signed up to do it, not because they made any decision on their own. Goodness help them make their own decision. It can go the Canadian prohibition of certain toxic substances. By the way, I of course live here, and we have a lab that can see the exposure from products, and we can see how attention deficits created. And there's very little chance that Canada or the US will do anything about it. It's one of those preventable things, like Alzheimer's, quite preventable, or at least reduction. You can reduce it quite a bit, but the way our systems are made, if it hurts humans, it's very difficult to regulate. Why the only key substance in physical products in the Canadian prohibition is short-chain chlorinated paraffins, which are bioaccumulants. Again, if it bioaccumulates, it's got a different standard of care. It basically have to show a math related to its bioaccumulation, which is much easier, as opposed to showing they cause attention deficit, where the bar to meet that criteria is much, much higher. Okay. Now, the Canadian Plastics Registry was released in April. The PFAS reporting we're going to talk about today was released in July. In around October, you're going to see new prohibitions kicked in. And the arrow just appeared a little too quickly there. Anyways, you're going to see the chlorine plus, PFOA, and they're going to have some restriction published this fall, but amongst a bunch of other bioaccumulants. Again, bioaccumulants, not human health hazards. They'll be released around October, probably banned in 2025 or 2026. So suddenly, you're going to see a whole pile of restrictions come this fall in Canada, which are going to be the first really impacting ones in North America. And even though Canada is physically large, it's mostly just the US's hat. We don't really have much of a population. So it really doesn't matter, except you generally sell the same products in Canada and the US. So the Canadian restrictions will be affecting quite a bit of your North American work. And that a lot of it's coming around October. Meanwhile, that arrow is, which should have appeared later, but there it is. What I'm talking about is that section, the Section 71 notice for the January 2025 PFAS reporting deadline. That one. There's a lot of other stuff going on. I've talked about the plastic registry last time. I'm sure come fall, I'm going to be talking about the Canadian prohibition, the new restrictions on the far right. They were supposed to be published this summer, but they said this summer, but probably not until this fall, which they're always late, so fall at least. What I want to talk about today was where the arrow is. So this is unnecessarily complicated, which I think this should be our national model for restricted materials legislation. There could have been a lot of simplifications, and wait until you actually see the notices and how circular a lot of the questions are. They're very unnecessarily complicated. So that should be our national model for this. That's CEPA. We're going to talk primarily, almost exclusively from here on in, on January 2025 PFAS reporting, which is a Section 71 notice about substances that are not yet on Schedule 1. Schedule 1 being a list of substances where they now approve to do more work, but there's nothing really restricted about them just being on the list. So the next couple of slides are about where you can find stuff yourself. This stuff is really complicated. You want to double check the things yourself. There's a lot of fine detail. Not everybody product's the same. It's from the Canadian Gazette Part 1. That's where notices go. They're mandatory. People say, hey, it's not mandatory because it's not a law. No, it's not. It's a notice. The law is the CEPA. CEPA makes it mandatory. That's why it gets published in Part 1. It's like REACH SVHCs in Europe. It's REACH regulation that makes the SVHC or restriction process mandatory, but each SVHC update isn't necessarily a regulation of its own. They're delegated amendments related to the powers in the original regulation. Same thing with this. The CEPA Part 1s are notices, which are mandatory, but they're not regulations of their own. They're they're already incorporated into the CEPA regulation. They're a section, either Section 71, this one today, or Section 46, like the Plastics Registry, that already have been approved for these kind of powers. But if you want to find it yourself, it's actually kind of a little hard to find Googling. You put Canadian PFAS Section 71, you actually don't get the law. You get a whole bunch of lawyers talking about the law. You might get a guidance document, but you don't get this thing. So anytime you see that kind of bluish, purplish underlined, that's a hyperlink. Everybody register, receive a copy of the slides. You can look at it yourself. I definitely recommend double checking yourself. There is a guidance manual. And again, that link will take you to it. There's a browser version and a PDF version. They're mostly a rewriting of the notice again in indented form. It's a guidance manual from Environment and Climate Change Canada and from Health Canada. As I mentioned before, it's joint. It isn't like the US TSCA, which is just EPA. The Canadian EPA is Environment and Climate Change Canada, ECCC, and the FDA in Canada is Health Canada. In this case, Health Canada is part of it, and that's why part of this. So that's why medical devices and pharma is in scope if they meet other criteria, but they're not excluded for any other reason than that. Then the reporting notice, one of the nice things about Section 71 is they, as far as I know, every time have an Excel file you fill in. So you can have an Excel file, you submit it. So the Excel file is ready. And I'm gonna talk about the data reporting. I'm gonna go into the Excel file. Now, in a lot of cases, I'm gonna be a bit high level and overly simplistic. The details they apply to you may not 100% align, especially when you do, as much as I'm gonna talk about physical products today, but imagine you use a floral spray in your manufacturing line in a factory in Canada. There's a little more to do. I'm mostly focusing on manufactured products, so articles, physical items. So it's an Excel file, you can already download it. That link will take you there. And where you submit it will be in a submission portal, which so this submission portal does a lot of things as the government of Canada. Normally it's like paying taxes. You can see all the different banks you can sign in through. That's not really how you're gonna do this. You're gonna end up doing this through your GC key down there. Now, as a government of Canada key, and most of us have one, it's a personal key. It's not government's key. It's like your SIN number or social insurance number. And now, by the way, it's no different than TSCA. TSCA is the same thing. You basically have to use your social insurance number, or as a foreigner, there's a whole other process we have to go through to get a personal key in the TSCA system. It's the same here. You need a personal government of Canada key, and it's yours, not the company's. Then you have to be assigned as a person or a contact or authorized person for your company to do the reporting. So then the GC key gets attached to the company and you report for the company. Clear as mud. And if you leave the company, it's the company's responsibility to sever your GC key from their account. Same thing in the US, by the way, with your CDX key or whichever, or code, it's yours individually that you report for the company. If in the future you separate, the company is supposed to sever you from them. But the ID is not the company's ID, it's your ID. You're like, what do you mean I'm giving like my social insurance number? It's basically the same. That's why you have all those bank things at the top. It's one of those. So it's a bit special if you haven't done it before. It's a little easier for Canadian citizen, definitely. But it's through a portal using your GC key. And that link will take you to this page. It's unnecessarily complicated. But then TSCA is actually almost identical, except for where it isn't, to the Canadian one. You have a CDX code or key of your own individual that you attach to the company. It's very similar. It doesn't have an Excel sheet. It is a browser-based kind of data, but similar idea. Okay, key definitions. By the way, some of the words here don't make the most sense. So I kind of explain them. Like if you looked them up on Google, the word in the notice doesn't agree with what the Google definition or Webster's dictionary definition is. So substance, a little easier. It's a single chemical. That's if you're selling like PTFE on its own or a bucket of PFOA or something. In the PFAS world, that's pretty rare unless you're a primary chemicals maker. Products are not physical products. A laptop is not a product. And you're like, well, my product is a laptop. Not for legislation. Chemical products, products are chemical products like sunscreen, not physical products like a laptop. Manufactured items are physical products like a laptop. So if you're going through the legislation, and I'm going to talk around manufactured items, articles, physical products, you're looking around the requirements of manufactured items. If you say, hey, products have to do this, that's not physical. Manufactured items. And they're all in scope. By the way, they're all in scope, but the requirements are a bit different. And the manufactured items are really split in two groupings. There's a very specific list to have extra things to do, and then there's everybody else, which has less to do. And I'll explain that. So now, oversimplified, but pretty true, for physical products, you're only going to be reporting fluoropolymers. Fluorosalts are in scope, fluoroethers are in scope, and fluoropolymers But at the end of the day, the way the requirements work out, you're only reportable things for you a fluoropolymer. The others won't meet criteria in a physical product. Liquid, chemical, gas, you might be able to trigger some of the others, but based on what the thresholds are in which chemicals are specifically listed, there only are specific PFAS in them. There's a lot of the common ones, but not all of them. You're really reporting fluoropolymers. And you're reporting if they're above 1 ppm of an article, we'll say of a component, and you're over 100 kilograms a year of the substance. And there are two groupings. Group one are all these things: over 100 kilograms a year of children products, or intended to come in contact with mucosa like your nose, but intended. If you have like a ballpoint pen, you put it in your mouth, is that intended? It's pretty common. If ballpoint pens are toxic, I think half the people wouldn't survive elementary school or the working environment. Would be inhaled, have dermal exposure, oral exposure. So this is the biggest catch-all one. Dermal exposure means you can touch PTFE or FKM. If that's true, it's in this grouping. These groupings all look very similar. It's cookware or serving utensils intended for heated food. You have food packaging material, reusable beverage container. So for example, we had a lunch and learn, we had tacos come in, the paper bowls, everybody's like, oh, look, you have paper bowls, not plastic anymore. The only reason these paper bowls aren't leaking is because they have a fluoro coating on the inside. It's also why the state of Maine picks up PFAS in the water supply. It's the pulp and paper mills that make this kind of thing, flooding it down the water. It's nothing to do with most of your guys' products. PFAS in the water supply post-2021 comes from coal mining or pulp and paper. But it is in products, so a variety of ways, but ways getting into the water supply are just those. Food processing equipment, clothing, footwear, bedding, or towels, and also sleeping bags, and furniture and carpet. So these ones all have to report. And you go, hey, I'm not one of these. Well, everybody else has to report too, but it's actually a different section. So it's basically all of these guys have to report and everybody else has to report. Kind of the funniest section. The difference is the ones in the middle have to report more things. I'll show that later. And the one at the bottom, everybody else, the other category. I'm going to refer to everybody else as the other category. The other category has reduced reporting requirement. They're still in scope. They still have to report PFAS. They still have to report the same chemicals. They just don't have to know nearly as much about them. The ones in above have to know a lot more about them. So these guys are in, but they have simplified reporting requirements. So those ones have the main reporting requirements. The ones at the bottom have the same 100 kilograms per year of the PTFE, not the product, or of the PVDF or the FKM, the fluoro, but their reporting requirements are simplified. So reportable PFAS, there are 270, there's a specific list. Unlike Tosca, which says all ones that mean 2 fully fluorinated carbons in a row or more you have to report, they're like, here are the specific CAS numbers, which are funny because they're almost none of the CAS numbers that are actually important. It's like people didn't really know anything, or maybe watched a movie with the actor who played the Incredible Hulk, and that's what they think of PFAS. Or read what a journalist says. One of the most terrifying things, actually, the whole thing, is the government in Canada put out a notice a couple weeks ago saying, hey, here are what we think are the main PFAS sources from water, and they don't have the top 2. They don't have pulp and paper, and they don't have coal. They have a lot of hilarious ones, but they don't have the big ones. So fluorosalts in physical products, none have any reasonable chance of being above 1 ppm, and they have a lower threshold. This is 10 grams per year. So the fluorosalts have a lower threshold, not 100 kilograms. I was mostly talking about polymers. This is salts. The salts aren't going to be there at 10 gram level, except for PFBA, which is not one of those 273. PFBA is commonly, and PFBS is commonly used at low concentrations in polycarbonate, like your display screen, to make sure that's flame retardant and clear. However, it's not listed in the salt. So the only salt that's used in any real concentrations in physical products over 1 ppm isn't in the list anyways. So PFBA is the only, and PFBS, the sulfonated version, are the only PFAS salts in manufactured items at that kind of concentration, and they're not in the list of salt. So you don't have to report them, which we find hilarious. Like the one of this 100 of the entire thing that might actually report reportable manufactured items is not in the list. It's not the worst miss. The worst miss is funny later. There are 26 fluoropolymers. Those are really for manufactured items, what you're looking at reporting. And most of them are exotically obscure chlorinated and fluorinated ones, chlorinated and brominated ones. Not the main ones. PTFE is there, including it has PTFE is there, Teflon, FKM is there, and PVDF is there. So Teflon, Viton, and Kynar are there. I have to look up PFA. I forgot to do that after the last one. But they don't have fluoroacrylics. which are maybe the most common of the PFAS polymers, and they don't have CalRes. The perfluoroelastomers, FFKM, which are actually relatively rare. So that FFKM is not the end of the world. We're looking at oil and gas and a few like specialized uses. Fluoroacrylics, you're looking at everything. Go into a store, fluoroacrylics. Fluoroacrylics is a huge miss. And I see what went wrong. A lot of polymers don't have CAS numbers. And I don't know if people have internalized this. Polymers are not the same as monomers. The naming conventions aren't the same. They use PMM notices or ascension numbers. So in the EPA, they're mostly ascension number based. And they're mostly listed as fluorinated acrylic monomer. You'll see that. Or fluorinated acrylic polymer. There are some monomers in the family. There's one in the entire list that's related to fluoroacrylics is one monomer. However, it's not what's actually in the product. What's in the product is a polymer. This one is not listed there, nothing applicable. And why is that a big deal, this miss? And the companies that use it, which is a lot of companies, it's not a big deal for them because they don't have to report. But if Canada actually wanted to make use of this, they completely dropped the ball. And we emailed them about this, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So in February of 2024, we had a discussion with them earlier too, saying, hey guys, they're like, there's fluoroacrylic coatings are everywhere. And they're like, no, they aren't, because people said there weren't. Because we asked the companies and nobody responded. I'm like, that's not. You asking a question that nobody gets back to you on, that's not really a good reason. Or one guy got back to you and they said their product doesn't, because they're Oikotex or something. Anyways, so to prove point, in February of this year, we bought 11 pairs of children winter gloves. 9 of 11 had the fluoroacrylic coatings, that polymer, that unreportable polymer. And so on textiles, which is one of the major categories earlier, this is the main one in that. And a lot of them have the PFOA family. None of this is reportable in the current survey. The actual main use for children, this is children's winter gloves for textiles, not there. Now, we talk to them and they say, hey, a company could submit it under stakeholder interest. We're interested in this one, but it's not mandatory. Sure. Good. All right. Fine. Companies can do a non-mandatory submission, and we'd help them with it, but I don't see that happening very much. Okay, so fluoroacrylics, they are the main PFAS in children's products. Would be inhaled dermal exposure oral, if used as intended. Food packaging material, the one on the taco bowl is a fluoroacrylic. Clothing, footwear, bedding, or towels, the mittens. Furniture or carpet. Basically, almost all the major categories specifically listed, they don't have the PFAS for them, which personally, sticks in my craw, because if we're going to go through this effort, can you at least make it so there's like some positive outcome? Like if we're going to try to make the world a better place, why don't we actually try? We made it super complicated, which I don't think is trying. It would be nice if we tried, but still mandatory. But it would be really cool if we tried. Because if all the companies are going to go through this stuff and you're going to come out with an answer which is completely wrong, which could explain why a lot of things don't get restricted in Canada. One neat thing, here's a neat thing. If you ever try, and you do this in the US too, here's a neat game. Find a pulp and paper mill, find a publicly available water test data downstream from the pulp and paper mill. Go for it. Maine has a bit, and it's not on purpose because of another thing. It's the way because they've been so bad down pulp and paper, they've had to split their test results between like upper pond and lower pond, and the splitting is listed. And the reason they have to split their test results is listed there. It's because of polychlorinated biphenyls and PFAS from pulp and paper, but they don't actually give you the results. They just tell you because it's so much worse in one section than the other, that's why they have to split how they're doing testing, but they don't release it. It's kind of an interesting one where it could be why also, Environment Canada doesn't know about it, left hand or right hand, is if it's not publicly available, it's kind of a hidden thing. And that's where PCBs. So in a lot of our quarterlies and monthlies, we talked about, some of the new updates of polychlorinated biphenyls, which have been banned since the first Star Wars, 1977, are still in water supplies, almost exclusively from the chlorination process downstream of pulp and paper. And good luck finding a water test result downstream. Well, I was at a place in the holidays last week that have tons of pulp and paper mills, tons of publicly available water test data upstream from them, nothing downstream. Anywho, you'll end up, I'm going to talk about what you have to submit. Enough big complaining. I'm like, look, if we're going to do all this work, why don't you make it worth something? Okay, so the Excel file you have to fill in. It's Link there, you can download it. Anybody we do work for, it's really easy. If we've done previous PFAS work of any type, it's just we've already set up all the data to be remanipulated. It wasn't 100% sure what this will look like, so we kept it in a higher level unmanipulated form, but it's straightforward for us to manipulate it into this form. The first tab is actually not bad. At the top, actually pretty good. The first section has a bunch of links where you can get more information. As you go down, no, I don't fix this one. As you go down, they actually explain a lot of the rule, which is really hard to read. It helps explain the tabs, what goes in them. It's not perfect, but it gives you a better idea. Because in the law, like from manufactured items, physical products like laptops, the ones that are in that list, like dermal exposure, children's, have to report more things. The ones that are not are still in scope, but they have to report less things. And the first tab is actually a little bit helpful on what that is. So everybody who has a product that meets the 1 ppm and 100 kilograms for fluoropolymers, for physical products, has to put in the contact information of the company and the contact person. Awesome. Or their authorized person. That's section 8. Which my first thing when I see this is like Klinger from MASH, section 8, how he's trying to get out of the military and why he's cross-dressing. Kind of funny this is section 8, but it's the individual and the company. Section 9 is the one everybody has to do. And if you're in scope, if you don't meet the requirements, so by the way, if you don't meet the requirements, you don't have to do any, like you don't have the thresholds, you don't have to do anything, but we strongly recommend you do the letter of non-engagement, and we can help you with it because it basically says we've looked at it, we're done, and so they don't bother you or think you're not compliant. It's just a simple letter, and we'll help you with it. And basically, these Section 71 surveys are every year, by the way. It's just a matter of saying, nope, this one doesn't apply to us, and this is why. And they basically check your box off. So this is Section 9. It basically, what's the substance, and what's the generic name of the manufactured item it's in? So you don't have to say, it's the the Vigor 13A product. You can say it's like headsets, and the substance is PTFE. And then we have PFA in the headsets also. So it's generic name. All you're doing is saying whether you have it over the threshold. You're not actually saying any concentration information, any function information. And so this is the one that everybody has to do, especially for manufactured products. So the nice thing about this one is when you're the products in the other category, like, well, laptops have dermal, but imagine you're a coffee machine and you're like, hey, I touch hot beverage. Yeah, but the PFA wire inside doesn't. And if it's over 100 kilograms a year, it has to report here, but it doesn't have to have concentration and use information, function information. It just says, have to say it's there. And so for most physical products, this is where it ends. Done. It's a bit easy. There's no volume or concentration information on this one. It's just, what PFAS do you have over the limit? What generic product type is it in? Sweet. Okay. There's use information. So if you're using PFAS, like in a fluorolubricant in, say, a factory in Canada, there's some use sections you can do. I'm mostly going to talk about manufactured items, so I can skip along. Mostly looking at chemicals being used. If you're using like fluoroethers or other fluoros, like in manufacturing, it's a use in Canada that gets reported here, but that's really chemicals. So PFAS and products, section 11 are for basically the specific listed products. These are the ones that are in that specific list of, children's products and dermal contact and all those sort of things. They have additional things to report, like quantities. They actually have to report the quantities. They don't just have to report they're over the threshold. The other funny thing is sometimes you can worry about the math, but close enough. And the other one, just say you're over the threshold and you meet your requirement. And it just simplifies your life. So this one, though, you have to go into a lot more detail, like what are the quantities imported, and then more details on what's your function code, what's the application code of your product. So laptops are under electrical and IT, and there's a function code for the application code for them, and then the PTFE is in them as a electrical insulator, and that actually doesn't have a function code. So you have to use U999 and say insulator. Actually, you have to do basically the same thing in the US. Or there's a code, or using it in the fan as a flame retard, that does have a function code. But these are only for those specifically listed products, which electronics, unless the PTFE is hand contact, dermal contact, if it's internal, no, doesn't go here. So this is those specifically listed ones. Children's products, carpeting, bedding, all of those. which is super funny because the main chemical most of them have is a fluoroacrylic, and it's not in the reportable list. So this is basically mostly a sheet that's not going to be used much, except for, say, medical devices, PTFE, that have thermal contact or something like that. Otherwise, not very often. Non-stick frying pans, sure, they'll be in here, the PTFE. But it's basically, they don't know what they don't know, and they've kind of created a situation where they're not going to know what they don't know. So this is really for the chemicals products. So if you're selling chemicals like PTFE and sunscreen. So fluoros were super common in makeup until 2021. Now it's mostly silicone rubber. The basis of most makeup is just coating yourself with silicone rubber. That keeps the water in while allowing things to breathe. When in doubt, flip around your moisturizer or your conditioner or whatever, and the word dimethicone is a fancy word, means silicone rubber. It's literally the silicone rubber from your spatula. You put it all over your body. It keeps the water in, lets oils and air through. Now, there are additional requirements in section 13 and beyond where you can get into like, they're optional on studies and here are all the breakdown products, but they're mostly optional. If you really have some really useful information on breakdown products, there's a whole bunch of other technical stuff you can add, but they're not mandatory. So I'm not really going to get into the non-mandatory super technical stuff. So if you want to say how much more, there's a whole section 14, where if you have like studies on the breakdown products of PFOA and PTFE, you can add it. So if you have for a company that might do it, Teflon fluoro coating, you're saying, hey, there's no PFOA in it, doesn't break it down, and you have studies to do that, you may have a motivation to submit that. And so the people who make the Teflon food coating may have a different motivation because the coating on a frying pan does not contain any PFAS that ends up in drinking water, nor that it degrades into it. It's probably the safest material you can have for food contact, period. Which is neat. Like I was at a family reunion last week, and I was like, what do you cook with? Well, Teflon. Like, oh, isn't that bad? I'm like, no, it's actually great. It's probably the healthiest one you can have. It protects you from the aluminum underneath, which is much, much worse. Silicone is not very good at all. It has 10,000 times the forever chemical of even a worse PTFE. It is not oil resistant. It'll pick up the smell and taste of anything that ever touches it. One of the problems, you ever take a silicone spatula you don't care about, put it in the dishwasher. When you take it out, it will smell and taste like everything that was in there because it's not oil resistant at all. It'll suck up everywhere. It's a sponge for oil. PTFE is not. It's a lot safer. And so your frying pan does not contain, nor does it degrade into any PFAS that ends up in drinking water. That's your paper. That's different. That is, now they've gone from plastic to paper bowls and forks and all that. Their pulp and paper plants are now just pouring it into the water. Anywho, makeup until 2021, yes, PFOA was one of the main ingredients. It was by the third most common ingredient. After that, now it's really just, when you're coal mining, the coal dust can explode unless you put a surfactant on it to keep it from agglomerating. It's kind of a big deal, and keep it wetted down. So there's a lot of fluoros in that. So downstream coal mining, you'll see arsenic. Whenever you open up the ground, you'll see arsenic. That's a key. When you see arsenic in the water supply, it's mining. It's like polychlorinated biphenyls. It means you got pulp and paper. And then with the arsenic, you'll see the PFOA. Okay, so what you have to submit, you need the name and contact details of the business. The product families, the reportable PFAS, like laptops or centrifuges. You don't have to, you can be more granular. You can say, hey, it's the Alphanon 3 has a laptop. You can do that. I'm going to say laptops have PFA or PTFE. The PFAS that's in them, like PFA or PTFE, and for most physical products, that's it. The ones on the specific list have more details. The name, everybody has to put the name of the reportable PFAS. The ones with specific details have to do the quantify. I'm going to fix that. The quantity of PFAS, but that's only for the ones in the specific list. And then the uses. These are only for the ones in the specific listed products. And that's per product family, like for laptops, what's the PTFE in it? What's the application code of the product? What's the application code of the laptop? There's a pull down. What are the function codes of the PTFE? Well, so you have PTFE in the coax cable. That is electrical insulation. You have PTFE as a secondary anti-drip flame retardant in the fan. That's the second use is flame retardant. But that's it. You're just reporting laptop application, which I think is IT, which I think you put a lot of equipment under the same application code. Like medical devices is an application code. So you don't have to worry about separating your medical devices. They have one code. What application code? and then the function of the PFAS and which PFAS it is. So I can make two little updates to the previous slide. Definitely make it clear that the concentration and volume information is only needed for the ones that are specifically listed. The like textiles and the food contacting, et cetera, dermal contacting, while everybody else, like the PFA inside your laptop, just has to say, I have PFA, and it's in laptops. So our process, we use represented products. We leverage US TSCA PFAS reporting. The US TSCA PFAS reporting has more detail, but it's very similar. We leverage the Canadian Plastics Registry for sure. So for this, we have to report the fluoropolymers. For Canadian Plastics, we have to report all polymers. It's actually everything we do for PFAS reporting is just a subset of the Canadian Plastics Registry. It's more detailed. Cool. And they're both due next year. Why don't you just do them at the same time? And because Canadian Plastics Registry, you have to report all polymers, not just fluoros. Big thing, don't get caught up in the details. At the end of the day, you're likely going to say, we have PTFE in our IT equipment. This is my name, and this is the company. That's it. Now, if your food contact surface, there's more. If dermal exposure, like your PTFE is on the outside, or the PFA is on the outside, or it's a medical device, you're going to have a little more if you have dermal or oral contact. Otherwise, you're just saying what ones you have, not even the concentration, and what types of products. And medical device is an application category. PFAS reporting is very high level. And it's the PFAS in the products, not the components. So you're not really getting the granular, saying like laptops or now medical device have all one application code, but you would normally describe medical devices that are quite different. Like if you have probes versus catheters, you'd separate them. You can't describe. You can have to describe them by a generic name. It's not a really good generic name for that. Just saying medical devices, they have the same application code, cool, but their generic name is different. So you will have to separate the medical devices and IT along generic lines. How could you describe these products and categorize them? You probably already do that in your website. It's one-time reporting, so I don't get caught up in the details. Like it's one-time report. It's 2023 related to your 2023 manufacturing, use, and importation data only. Physical products, it's mostly going to be importation data. It's very technical, both chemical and regulatory. So I got to update this. Use information is more important than chemical information for some products where they obviously have PTFE. Why they have PTFE for all the listed products is more important. That's actually, you're going to report more why you have it than the fact it's there. Is that what you're gathering? Just making sure everybody's aligned. Now, of course, you could probably have an expert like ourselves figure it out afterward. And that's what we do a lot of our projects. You have no data, we can do it. If you have partial data, we can do it. You have all your data, you just need us to fix it. Normally you end up with, you have gaps we have to fix anyways. One thing we always do is we take the output and work backwards. And some other people in the questions this morning have definitely done the same thing. Some very good questions about that. Anyways, whatever you do, if you've done data gathering, you're going to have to manipulate the data to get the output anyways. So focus, look at what the output is and work from there. You're 5 months into the deadline for Canada and 10 months for the deadline for the US. So I would start looking at how the output looks, or just talk to someone like us, or like, oh my God, I have to do this and the plastics registry, and I've done part of it. Fine, we'll take the part and put it all together and just get it done. Don't overcomplicate the problem. The details, what's complicated, especially in the plastic registry in the US, are how you manipulate your volumes into the report. That's trickier, and we have a really good way to do that. But whether you have a polymer in your products, it's usually so blatantly obvious, or you have really complicated products, like you make a complicated piece of lab equipment, you have tons, they're obvious. But you just have to say you have it and why. So don't overcomplicate it. Then how do you math in your volumes? We'll help you with that. So the way we do it for simple products that are not super high value, we choose a represented product, because again, we're looking at generic product names. We test it. We're like, well, do you have to test? It's faster and cheaper. Our focus is, how do we get you the best compliance for the least effort, least cost functionally for you? Is it you want to be the top 0.5% of compliance? We can do more. Generally, we're targeting you to be in the top 10% of compliance for the bottom 10% or 20% of effort. Testing is just easier. We have an assembly line for things cheap. We're done. How long would it take you to get that PFAS for that multimeter? Oh, yeah, it'll probably take you. No problem. We'll probably finish in maybe 4 or 5 months, maybe 3 or 4 months. We'll finish in a day. There's cost advantages to doing that. And we'll create the declaration. Simple, fast, and we do so much of this. It's very battle tested. We've handled a lot of the if, then, buts. We've seen everything. For complex products where you don't want to test the big expensive thing because it's big and expensive, unless you're testing it for some other reason. And then if you're doing reach and Prop 65, it's a good addition. And then we can do it from engineering evaluation and data gathering. Often it's blatantly obvious that it has a PTFE or PFA wire. Awesome. I just have to say it because this is not in a specific list. I just have to say it's PFA. Great. Don't overcomplicate things. Plastics registry, I'm going to have to list all the plastics, and we use roughly the same process for the plastics registry, where you don't want to destroy your $10,000 piece of equipment. There's, for the level of data you need, there's a better way to do it. It's simple, fast, and uncomplicated. It's kind of funny. Often the hardest part for plastics registry is literally, cool, we did the complex product. How much packaging do you think you have in there? Well, we have foam packaging. Awesome. How much does it weigh? What foam is it? Well, I don't know. Believe it or not, for a plastic registry, that's a good portion of what you're going to report is the foam in the box that goes with that product. And sometimes like, hey, this product actually shipped in 3 different boxes. Awesome. What the hardest thing is going to be for you is probably what is the foam and how much does it weigh? The rest, what's in the physical product is not so bad. We have tons of models for that, but the model doesn't account for like how much foam is in the box, because that's going to be one of your biggest reportable plastics in that thing. For that, now that's plastics registry, but it is always interesting. What actually is complicated for companies is different from what they think it is. They think, hey, it's my super complicated device. We're like, actually, it's probably going to be the foam in the box you ship it with, because nobody really pays attention to what it is and how much is there. Overlapping regulations. You have Canadian PFAS reporting. Very strong overlap with US TSCA PFAS reporting. They're both reporting PFAS. TSCA they both include PFAS, and they're both reporting. TSCA has more PFAS in scope. They're every PFAS is there. Canada is a specific list, missing things like fluoroacrylics, so it's a smaller list. And their reporting is a bit different. They're conceptually similar. Canada is often very much simpler. They're often have the application codes and function codes, and you're reporting PTFE. You're not reporting centrifuges as much. Canada, you report the equipment type, which is different than TSCA. TSCA, you just report the chemical. So the reporting is a bit different, but the data itself is very similar. TSCA is more inclusive on PFAS. Canada has less of them. And then the plastics registry overlaps them very strongly because reportable PFAS are polymers. So you have to report them under the plastics registry anyway. Strangely enough, your PFAS reporting is generally going to be more detailed for the plastics registry than it is for the PFAS reporting. Now, you also have to report all the other polymers. But if you're doing the plastics registry, the PFAS side is there. You just have to do it. Now, slight variations for additives and everything like that, the data is there because you have to report your polymers to the Canadian Plastic Registry. For physical products, you're really only, because of the weight limits and 100 kilograms, you're only reporting fluoropolymers anyways. They're the only things that are going to meet the criteria. So they're already under the plastic registry. Also, there's slight variations like the additive flame retardant that comes up because it's primarily ABS. It looks like ABS in the Canadian Plastics Registry, but there's a PFAS in it. So there's some variations. And that's why our process handles the variations. But there's huge overlap. Large advantages to completing all three in parallel. Key takeaways from PFAS reporting. It's due January 2025. So one-time reporting. Don't overcomplicate things. It has significant overlap with US TSCA PFAS, due in May 2025. Significant overlap with Canadian Plastics Registry, due September 2025. You may need more than the CAS number. If you're one of those listed products, you're going to have to know use and function. You need it for the US anyways. You need function and application for the US reporting anyways. And if you're medical devices, you don't have to do the US one, but you might have dermal or oral contact here or mucosa contact in Canada, so you'll need the function application. When in doubt, contact us. We can help you. That's one of the reasons I also gave you the links earlier to the individual notices so you can look at where it actually goes for your product. Because not everybody's 100% the same. And people are talking about, is there dermal contact or oral contact? And therefore it changes my rules. But it's only in these products, not those. It's a bit complicated. So the way we handle it for any company, when in doubt, well, just come to us and say, you can say, hey, do this product. Well, often we'll just say, we know what you sell. We can tell. This is how you do it for what you sell. This is exactly how you do the whole program. And it usually ends up being a lot shorter and a lot less expensive and a lot better than you think. I definitely recommend reaching out for the quote. At least get a number. Well, you're going to be surprised by how much faster and less expensive it is from other things you're thinking about. You should probably charge more, but we really just, we're really focused on how do we get you the best compliance for the least effort? How do we get you in the top 10% of compliance. It's not the top 1% of companies. We can do that too, for sure, but that takes a lot more effort. And the value for most companies is there. If you're a food contacting material with Teflon, you want to justify keeping Teflon, you want to be up in the top 1%. Everybody else, top 10% for the bottom 20 or 25% effort. Phase one, client, provide us your available data. If you've done something, awesome. If you only know what your product is, awesome. If you want to give us a simple product, we'll finish it. Or the bill of materials. Often you're going to get better, faster result for like an inexpensive product just to send it to us. And we can do everything else we do here. Otherwise, we can do a lot off your bill of materials. Plastic registry has additional requirements. Phase two, we generate the product declaration. So this is what you declare for the product. So then we can map it into your volumes to figure out your concentrations and whether you meet certain criteria and what you have to report. So we'll summarize the data you have and generate the data you don't have. Phase three, we need your 2023 sales data. US, it's 2011 till 2022. Canada is 2023. And it's Canadian sales data. And then we will create the amalgamated submission and support you doing it. You're going to want to submit yourself because you're going to want to control it, but the buttons will make no sense. If you've done it the first time, we can web meeting in with you and help you push the right buttons. It's all part of the project. So again, super complicated, unnecessarily complicated. We're here to help. And you have this in January. You're going to have the Section 46 notice in September, the plastics registry you have to complete, and probably you'll have restrictions on PFOA, Dechlorine Plus, and similar in late 2025 under the prohibition, probably announced about October of this year. So you're going to see lots more of this. Any questions? So again, everybody register, receive a copy of the slides. I have to make a pair of corrections. They'll be out in the final version. The afternoon version is way better than the morning version. We got lots of questions this morning. Help the detail on how you separate specifically listed manufacturer items from the other category. What they have to report wasn't as clear. It's a unnecessarily complicated regulation, so these slides are better. Everybody register, receive a copy of the slides. There will be an email going out with also a link to the recording where you can slow me down so it might make more sense. Good question. My colleague attended the earlier webinar and has this question. If we, as a foreign company, do not meet the 100 kilograms per year minimum, but our customers or distributor might meet it, how would that be handled? So it's their responsibility for this one. Plastics registry, it's the brand owner. Really weird. This one, it's the importer's requirement. The importer's responsible. However, they will likely need the technical information from you. So you're likely going to have to do the work so they can submit, but they're ultimately responsible. That said, a foreign company can submit. And I believe an email went out relatively recently from the government to foreign companies that contact information saying, hey, you can actually submit too. You don't have to though, but if you do, then your distributor doesn't. So you have the ability to report, and which is pretty easy too. If you only have to report, you're not one of the specifically listed products, you're one of the generically ones, you just have to say, I have PTFE in laptops. It's not that hard. And so it might be even easier than you're trying to provide the data to your distributor and explaining it to them. You might just go, we submitted, our products are covered. Don't worry about it, because the submission might be really easy for you. You also might make food contacting surfaces where you might have better interest in the actual quality of the submission. So Canada doesn't try to justify banning Teflon coatings in Canada. That's a different thing. So you might, as a foreign entity, decide it's better if you did it. So the foreign entity can, they just don't have to. You probably get this. Will this apply to US companies that have imported into Canada in 2023? Technically, you can't have it imported into Canada if you don't have an entity here. Your customer will be the importer. If it's the distributor, their responsibility. If it's the user, like you're selling to a factory that uses the product in the factory line, personal use is not included. Importation for personal use is not included. So if you import assembly line for your own use, it's not included either. US companies aren't the importer. If you look deeply, it's someone else. You might have shipped it to Canada, but it's possible, but extraordinarily difficult for the US company to be the importer, because Canada wants somebody inside their boundaries, like the US does for their stuff, that's responsible for the safety and everything. So somebody has to take responsibility that's inside the Canadian border. So chances are you shipped it here, chances are there's somebody else being the importer. Is the reporting form already available? Yep. So if you go to the link, many slides ago, and you probably asked this question beforehand, you can actually hit that link when you get the slides and go to it. Can we use a sign-in partner? Is it an option? It may be. The Plastics Registry does have the ability to devolve or delegate the responsibility. There's no real delegations in this. However, it seems like it's set up as long as somebody reports your stuff, it's fine. So even the foreign company can report. But it's not as cut and dry as the Section 46 plastic notice, Plastics Registry stuff that has for delegation of responsibility. Fluoropolymer report triggering 100 kilograms of the substance or of the product, and it's over 1 ppm of a component. If I sell a server, which is B2B, will I come under the other category? Mostly. If your PTFE is in a part that has dermal contact that people touch, you're in the listed category. If they don't, like it's internal wiring, then no, you're in the other category. If I import food into Canada, I'm responsible for notifying on the packaging, or is the packaging manufacturer? It's the importer. So if you're importing it and the packaging, right, you're responsible. Now, if the foreign packaging maker does it, then you don't have to. Plastics Registry is different. It's the brand owner of the packaged food. So that might be somebody different. This is the importer. Kind of a little different. Plastics Registry is the brand owner. This one is the importer. It doesn't mean the foreign entity can't do it for the packaging. Now, on the bright side, PFAS won't be in packaging at a reportable amount because the PFAS used in packaging is not a listed PFAS in the reporting. Fluoroacrylics, which are the food packaging one, aren't there. So hopefully, in many cases, it'll be a moot point. The PFAS used in food packaging is not a reportable PFAS for the Canadian PFAS reporting. It is for the US, not the Canadian. Oops. It's one of the side effects of hitting the actual Q&A. It flips screens on me. Recognizing pharmaceuticals are in scope, but IVDs and medical devices used within a clinical laboratory setting qualify for the laboratory exclusion? Generally, no. What it's really for, laboratory exclusion is really for control samples. So they don't bother with it. So for example, we have control samples of PTFE and PFA and FFKM and FKM in the lab as control samples. Those are what the exclusion is really for. Yeah, not really for the IVD devices, no. In Section 9 area, I used the example of headsets for the product description. Is it a defined list of products to pick from, or is the person completing the form? It's completely up to you. There's no pull down. It's generic. You don't use an HS code. You can. There's none of that. You can use HS code to describe it, and they'd be happy with that, but it doesn't have prescriptive ways to generically describe the product. Can we just say electronic products? Not easily. You can say it, and you can even get away with it. I would look at how you look at it from either way you market it or the way you use it for customs codes, whichever makes sense. As long as it's tangible, like if you're on your website and you say, hey, this is the page for our microphones and this is the page for our speakers and microphones make sense separating. How it comes in contact with mucosa clarified. Does a refrigerator, crisper drawer, and ice cube tray fall because it contains food before it is consumed? No, it has to come directly in contact. It is food contacting, but food contacting only seems to apply if it's heated. It touches heated food, which microwave might. The refrigerator doesn't. Why? I don't know. But that's the way the rules are. So it likely be in the other category. We'd have, in any individual situation, we take a look at. Well, keep doing that. Right? If I actually click on your question, it causes problems. Which means I am paying attention to your questions. It's just causing great graphical problems. What are clothing like waterproofing coating of C8 or C6? Hence, we need to figure how much is sprayed on. Those are fluoroacrylics. Fluoroacrylics are not in scope. They should be, but they're not. So that spray on is a fluoroacrylic. It's not in the listed substances, so it's not reportable. Even though it is a PFAS, it is in the US, it's just not in Canada. Kind of hilarious thing about that. If our products fall into the other category, we only need to report for sections 8 and 9. Yes, you can report more, but it's only mandatory for 8 and 9. If you have some reason to report a study or why it's safe, you can report in section 13 and 14 too. You don't have to. So there'll be no PFAS reporting for 2024. It's just one time. Yeah, it's just one time. It's a section 71 notice. To be repeat, normally has to be section 46. And that's why the Canadian Plastics Registry is repeat. It's because it's the plastic manufactured items are on Schedule 1, so they can do a section 46 notice, which is a different part of CEPA. Well, it's like REACH SPHCs are Article 33 and REACH restrictions are Article 67 of REACH. They're different sections. But yeah, it's one time. What type of manipulation of the data is acceptable? You have to meet the output, whatever you need to do to make the output. That's why we always suggest looking at what the output is and how do you get there. Plastics registry is much more detailed. It's almost worth focusing there. There's a reporting obligation for the company that placed the product on the market or the company's brand name is on the product. Plastics registry, brand name. PFAS, import. Unless it's made in Canada, then it's a little more complicated. It's normally the manufacturer. So it usually ends up being the brand owner is the manufacturer if made in Canada. If it's imported, it's the import. Plastics registry, the default is actually the brand owner, irrespective of the import. Unless the brand owner does not exist in Canada, then it's the import. Section 71 versus Section 46. Threshold I heard today was 10 kilograms and 100 kilograms. It's 100 kilograms per year, but it's 10 grams if you're doing the chemical side. The chemical side, which has the PFAS salt, for 10 grams. Physical products is 100 kilograms. So chemicals are 10 grams. So if you're adding PFBA, which is a chemical, which is a salt, they're 10 gram limit to your product. However, PFBA is the only salt that would be in your product and it's not listed. So it ends up being the 100 kilograms. Oversimplification, let's see if something very exotic, the salts, if they're in a physical product, won't meet the 10 gram or the 1 ppm requirement. Polymers will, but polymers are part 2, and they have a 100 kilogram limit. What is the evidence we need to have to do reporting? Can we rely on supplier disclosure on PFAS in the application? It has to be reasonable. You had to have tried. If somebody asks, you have to show how you tried and did work. The larger your sales and the more visible your brand, the higher expectation of trying. But you have to be able to show you tried. You can't be lazy about it, but you're not expected to all be, PhD super experts in it. So you have to show you tried. Does Claigan have plastics reporting webinar? Yes. The previous 2 to this are the Canadian registry. And I have a lot of examples in the previous one. Available on our website, you can go there. We also have a YouTube channel, which I'm still getting used to this kind of thing. There, it's actually kind of flattering how many views those have, like hundreds and hundreds. Are any extensions available upon request? Yes. Section 71 notices usually have the ability, if you can justify it, like, it's really complicated, you can get an extension. We can help you how to file for an extension. So Section 71 is different than Section 46. Yes, it's January 2025, January 29th, I think, 2025. But there is the ability to file for extensions. We can definitely help you with that. Can you tell us more about the laboratory exemption? This guidance states that it does not apply to facilities or laboratories involved in development activities for industrial or commercial stakeholders. It's around the use of the fluoropolymer in laboratory settings for as basically a laboratory reagent. You can think about expanding it, but we have both for FTR and for mass specs and for everything else and for the XRFs, we have standards of like every major polymer. That use is exempted. I don't know why you still don't have to report it, but that one's exempted because it's the laboratory. It's also generally low volume use. So it shouldn't really be a problem. It doesn't apply the fact that we have PFA wires inside our XRF. That's different. That would normally get the laboratory exemption. No, it's around the chemical being used, like on the research purposes. Sorry, I'm well over time. I'm going to get to a couple more questions. I'm sorry if I don't get to all of them. Feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to do it. Also, feel free to reach out about costs, especially if you integrate all 3. You'd be surprised. It does take work, but it's generally a lot shorter and easier than you think. If we produce a consumer product in the US that is not one of the 12 listed categories and imported to Canada, are we responsible for the PFAS in our packaging? Yes. However, most packaging PFAS is. So the importer is responsible, whoever that is, which is often not the US company, it'll be some Canadian entity. However, most of the PFAS in packaging will not be reportable because they're mostly fluoroacrylics. There might be an exception. Teflon doesn't make great packaging, kind of rigid, slippery. PFA doesn't make good packaging. Viton definitely doesn't make good packaging. The only really fluoro in packaging is fluoroacrylics, and they're not listed here. You don't have to report them. Kind of, you keep coming back to that. There are a number of exclusions listed, such as fertilized pesticides, which are registered. Does the exclusion apply only if these products are registered versus just regulated? That is a very good question. I do not have the answer on the pesticide. That I have to look up. That's a very good question. I know that all PFAS can be tested for EPA US. Well, of course they can. That's ridiculous. For those that can't be tested, is Claigan planning to rely on engineering evaluation? We do engineering evaluation, so it's a bit complicated. All of them can, to a certain extent. So the ones that are all reported are all fluoropolymers. They're all tested. The only thing that the gap is if you have a fluoropolymer additive at a low concentration, you can't tell at the low concentration whether it's PTFE or ETFE as the additive. Like they're very similar polymers because low concentration, and there's really no test for that. But if it actually is PTFE or ETFE, they're easy to tell apart. And all the polymers are easy to tell apart. Where the challenge is a polymer, non-monomer, non-salt, that is low concentration, like a flame retardant additive. You can't tell the different fluoropolymers apart. You can tell monomers apart, but not polymers. So it's a bit of a tricky thing. So yes, but there is an engineering evaluation for differentiating. The testing can tell you which that is a polymer. Which polymer is at low concentration does take an engineering evaluation. And if we can't tell the difference, neither can the government. Sometimes we go back and forth. So one of the plastics registry, not PFAS, the thing that most people don't know. You get the little triangles on the plastics, and you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Number 2, I think, is high density polyethylene, which people see as recyclable. You recycle it. Number 4 is low density polyethylene, which is not. They're not that separate things. It's a continuum. So it's related to how many loose bonds you have. So low density polyethylene has more loose bonds, and it's a continuum. And as you get more and more bonds connected, you become linear low density polyethylene, but it's kind of arbitrary where that sits. And then eventually at a specific density of material, arbitrary at 0.940 specific gravity, you start calling it high density polyethylene, even though it is very marginally different than the other. It's just like this one has 40% loose bonds, and this one has 35%, and that's the differentiator. So polymer chemistry is also a bit problem where there isn't often cut and dry demarcations between one to the next, kind of a blending. So polymer chemistry is a bit more of a complicated thing. You can name the same situation different polymers actually in many cases. So there is a bit of an engineering evaluation, and there also can be two polymers you can call the same thing and still be valid. So that is a bit of a complicated problem. Monomers like PFOA, much easier, much more cut and dry, non-repeating. And basically every major fluorosalt is measurable because they all degrade into the fundamentals. So if you have a fluorosalt, you're going to see its degradation products. That's the whole point around the forever chemicals. Only a handful of them are forever. So if you're testing down the parts per billion and you have parts per million of a salt, you'll see one of the forever chemicals that is present. That's where you normally see the fluoroacrylics. You can see the fluorine, the fluoroacrylic, but you can also see the degradation products from the fluoroacrylates, and they degrade into the PFOA family, and those are the endpoints. So you'll always see them with fluoroacrylics. Ted, we are importing waterproof jackets that have C8, C6, and C8 coatings. Yeah, fluoroacrylics. Normally jackets shouldn't be Teflon because Teflon you have to fuse. So normally C8 and C6 are fluoroacrylics, which are not reportable. We have to figure out the coating volume of all the imported jackets. If it's coating, it's going to be fluoroacrylics, which isn't reportable. It's not reportable PFAS. It is for Tosca, not for Canada. Should be, but it's not. And you can do a submission for stakeholder information. You can do a stakeholder substance of interest. Got a funny name. You can submit that for the fluoroacrylics, but you don't have to do any weights. You don't have to do anything. Fluoroacrylics aren't there. If it was one of the was Teflon you're including with PTFE specifically. C8, by the way, 6 carbons in a row, which is referring to mostly the fluoroacrylic bond on it normally. Teflon coating you would, but Teflon normally is the coating for fabric. It is for metals, not for fabric. Sorry if I don't get to the rest of the parts we manufacture in Canada are the components, not the finished products. Are they in scope too? If you manufacture them here, yes, they are in scope. But they have to meet all the same criteria requirements, and it's a big difference between whether you make the polymer or just add the polymer or O-ring to your product. Polyfluoropolymers used in manufacturing equipment produced in a non-PFAS product are not reportable. Manufactured items are not in the use as chemicals, so it's more on sprays. So not really, but that's complicated, and we can help you with any specific case. So I didn't get to everybody's questions, got to most of them, apologize way over time. Feel free to reach out with any questions. Again, feel free. You should be getting an email with the updated slides, which are much better this afternoon than this morning. Also, the number of attendees is very flattering. This is a very new thing. It's in flux, the understanding of it at least. And it's not necessarily complicated. That's also why we provide you links. Definitely those about companies, which are about 100 companies now, that we specifically sit down and do quarterly and monthly updates. We'll go over it even more detail with you and your other stakeholders. And feel free to reach out for a quote. Even if you don't even know what to quote, you might be surprised how specific and refined the answer is. It's the first time you're doing it. It is not the first time we're doing it. So happy to help. We'll also learn things. You'll teach you things. You'll learn things. It'll be really interesting. Again, great hosting, everyone. We should see you by tomorrow, the slides, everything else. And I look forward to talking to everyone again soon. And see everyone soon.